You are nothing but a failure! You will obey us!
I am not your property. I do not belong to you.
My parents stood in my sister's marble-floored dining room, glasses raised, celebrating the fact that they had just signed away my inheritance to her. While I stood there in a 5-year-old coat they used to mock me for wearing. My mother turned to me, smirked, and said the words she'd been saving for 31 years. You were always the failure of this family, Emily. At least now Caroline can finally get what she deserves. Everyone laughed. My father raised his glass higher. And I just smiled. Because what none of them knew, what none of them could have possibly guessed, was that I wasn't the struggling daughter they thought I was. I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and set it gently on the table. Before you celebrate, I said quietly, you should probably read this first. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to love you most, stay until the end, because what happens next will make you want to stand up and cheer. This is the story of how I let my family believe I had nothing, right up until the moment I took everything back. Please stick with me till the end of this video because trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. My name is Emily Carter, and for as long as I can remember I was the disappointment. My younger sister Caroline was the golden child, straight A's, homecoming queen, the one my parents, Richard and Diane Carter, paraded around at every family gathering. I was the quiet one. The one who read books instead of chasing popularity. The one who chose a state school over the Ivy League school Caroline attended on my parents' dime, because I'd already decided I was going to build something of my own, without their money and without their permission. By the time I was 22, I had started a small online consulting business out of my studio apartment, teaching small business owners how to manage their finances and scale without debt. My parents thought it was a joke. A hobby, my father called it. Playing pretend businesswoman, my mother said once at Thanksgiving, in front of the entire extended family, while Caroline sat there in her designer blazer, freshly hired at a marketing firm my father had connections at. I didn't argue. I never argued. I smiled, finished my dinner, and went home to keep building. Because I knew something they didn't. Quiet growth is still growth. And I had learned a long time ago that the people who underestimate you the most are usually the ones who never bothered to ask what you were actually doing. For 9 years I built. I failed twice, restarted twice, and by the time I was 31, my consulting firm had grown into something none of them had bothered to notice, because I never told them the numbers. I never told them about the 7-figure contracts, the office space downtown, the investment portfolio I had quietly built with money my parents assumed I didn't have. I let them believe what they wanted to believe because the moment I stopped needing their approval was the moment I finally started living for myself. But 3 months ago, everything changed. My father called a family meeting, which, in the Carter household, meant Caroline needed something and my parents were about to hand it to her, dressed up as a family decision. That's when I learned about the trust. My grandmother, my father's mother, a woman named Eleanor who had built her own real estate business from nothing in the 1970s, had passed away 2 years earlier and left behind a trust meant to be split evenly between her grandchildren when we each turned 32. I was 31. My birthday was 5 months away. Caroline had just turned 30. Instead of waiting, my parents had gone to the estate attorney and petitioned to restructure the trust for family stability, using a clause my grandmother had written allowing early distribution in cases of financial hardship, a clause meant to help a struggling grandchild, not enrich a thriving one. My parents claimed I had chosen an unstable path, and that Caroline, who had just put a down payment on a house she couldn't quite afford, needed the money more urgently. They never asked me. They never even told me the petition was happening until it was already filed. When I found out, from a cousin, not from them, I called my mother, calm and steady, and asked her directly, "Did you file paperwork to take my portion of Grandma Eleanor's trust and give it to Caroline?" There was a pause. Then she said the words that told me everything I needed to know about how they'd always seen me. "Emily, be reasonable. You don't need it. You've never needed anything from us. Caroline actually has a real life to build. A real life. As if mine wasn't real. As if 9 years of 18-hour days, of turning down vacations and relationships and sleep to build something from nothing, wasn't real enough to count." I hung up the phone that night and didn't cry. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop and started making calls, not to fight, not yet. To understand exactly what my grandmother had actually written, and exactly what my parents thought they could get away with. The next morning I called Marcus Webb, the estate attorney who had handled my grandmother's affairs for nearly 2 decades. I had met him twice before, once at the reading of the will, and once at her funeral, where he'd pulled me aside and said something I hadn't thought much of at the time. "Your grandmother spoke about you often, Emily. She'd want you to call me if anything ever felt wrong." I told him everything. He went quiet for a moment, then said, "Emily, I need to be honest with you. That hardship clause requires the petitioning party to prove the receiving grandchild is in genuine financial need. And it requires a full asset disclosure from all beneficiaries before any redistribution can be approved by the court. Your parents filed this petition without ever requesting your financial records. Why would they skip that?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Because," Marcus said carefully, "if they'd requested your financial records, Emily, they would have discovered you're worth considerably more than your sister. And a court would never approve reallocating funds from a financially stable grandchild to another financially stable grandchild under a hardship clause. This petition wouldn't survive 5 minutes of real scrutiny." My parents didn't know how successful I'd become. Because they'd never asked. Because they'd never cared enough to. Marcus told me the court hearing to finalize the petition was in 6 weeks. He offered to file an objection immediately, with full documentation of my financial standing, which would almost certainly end the matter before it started. I asked him to wait. "Wait?" he asked, surprised. "My parents are hosting a dinner in 3 weeks," I said, "to celebrate the house Caroline's buying with money that isn't hers yet. I want to be there when they find out." For 3 weeks I played my part perfectly. When my mother called to check in, I let my voice sound tired, distant, like a woman quietly grieving a loss she'd already accepted. When Caroline texted me a photo of the house, a beautiful colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch, captioned, "Can't wait to finally have something that's mine, house with garden," I replied with a simple, "It's beautiful. I'm happy for you." I didn't lie. I just didn't tell the whole truth. My father called once, gruff as always, and said, "You're taking this well, Emily. I'm proud of you for not making a scene." I remember sitting in my office, surrounded by contracts worth more than that entire house, and saying, "I've learned it's better to let things play out." He had no idea how right he was. During those 3 weeks, Marcus and I prepared everything. Full financial disclosures. A formal objection ready to file the moment I gave the word. And something else, something I hadn't originally planned but which felt right the more I thought about it. I asked Marcus to draft a second document. A formal, permanent waiver removing my parents as co-trustees of what remained of my grandmother's estate, replacing them with a neutral third-party trustee, citing breach of fiduciary duty for attempting to redistribute funds without proper disclosure. If they wanted to play games with my grandmother's legacy, they were never going to get their hands on any part of it again. The dinner was set for a Saturday evening at Caroline's new house, a housewarming and family celebration, the invitation said, though we all knew what it really was. A celebration of my loss. I arrived in a plain gray coat, the same one my mother had once called something a librarian would be embarrassed to wear. I carried a leather folder in my bag, and I smiled the entire drive there because for the first time in 31 years, I wasn't walking into that family with anything to prove. I was walking in with everything to reveal. The house was full of people by the time I arrived. Aunts, uncles, family, friends, all sipping champagne under string lights on Caroline's new patio. My mother greeted me with a hug that felt more like a performance than an embrace. "You made it," she said, like she was surprised I'd show my face. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, smiling. Caroline found me near the kitchen island, glowing with the kind of confidence that only comes from believing you've won something. "Thank you for being okay with this, Em," she said, squeezing my arm. "I know it's a lot of money, but I really do need it more than you right now." I looked at her, really looked at her, and thought about every dinner where she'd been praised while I'd been dismissed, every "at least Caroline," and "why can't you be more like your sister?" I'd swallowed silently for 3 decades. And I still smiled. "You have no idea what I need, Caroline," I said softly. "But that's okay. You will soon." She laughed it off, assuming I was just being dramatic, and went to refill her glass. At 7 o'clock, my father gathered everyone in the dining room for a toast. He raised his glass and began speaking about family, about legacy, about how proud he was of Caroline for building a real future and here his eyes flicked toward me with something between pity and disdain. Some of us took longer to figure out what we wanted from life. My mother chimed in right on cue, the words she'd apparently been saving for the entire dinner. We just think it's important that resources go where they're actually needed. Emily's always been independent. She's never needed us. But Caroline still does, and honestly at this point, we consider Emily's portion more of a symbolic thing than anything she's actually relying on. A few relatives chuckled awkwardly. Caroline beamed. Then my mother turned to me directly and delivered the line I will never forget, the one that confirmed everything I'd always suspected about how little they'd ever truly seen me. You've always been the failure of this family, Emily, if we're being honest. At least now, Caroline can finally get what she deserves. The room went quiet. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. My father raised his glass higher, like her words were something to toast to. And I smiled. I set my wine glass down slowly on the table, reached into my bag, and pulled out the leather folder Marcus had prepared. The room's attention shifted toward me, confused, expectant. Before everyone celebrates, I said, my voice calm and even, I think you should all see this. I opened the folder and placed the first document in front of my parents. A complete financial disclosure statement, prepared by my own accountants, showing the value of my consulting firm, my investment portfolio, and my personal assets. My father's face went pale before he even finished the first line. My mother snatched the paper up, her eyes scanning faster and faster, her mouth slightly open. This isn't possible, she whispered. It's very possible, I said. I've been building this for 9 years. While you two were telling everyone I was playing pretend businesswoman, I was closing 7-figure contracts. While you were calling me the failure of this family at every holiday dinner, I was quietly worth more than this house, this street, and honestly, more than both of your combined retirement accounts. Caroline had gone completely silent, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Here's the part that matters, I continued, sliding the second document across the table. The hardship clause you used to petition the court requires proof that the receiving grandchild is in genuine financial need, and it requires full financial disclosure from every beneficiary, including me. You never requested mine, because you never actually cared what my numbers were. You just assumed because I didn't post about it, because I didn't brag about it, that I had nothing. My father tried to speak. Emily, we didn't. You didn't ask, I said, cutting him off, still smiling, still calm. You didn't ask because you didn't want the answer to get in the way of what you'd already decided to do. I pulled out the third document and set it in the center of the table, where everyone could see it. This is a formal objection already filed with the court as of this morning, I said. It includes full documentation proving I have no financial hardship whatsoever, which means the petition to redistribute Grandma Eleanor's trust legally cannot proceed. Not delayed. Not modified. It's over. Caroline finally spoke, her voice cracking. Emily, please, I already put a deposit down on. That's between you and whoever holds your mortgage, I said gently, and I meant it gently, because despite everything, I didn't hate my sister. I understood in some strange way that she was just as much a product of our parents' favoritism as I was a product of their dismissal. I'm not trying to punish you for wanting a home, Caroline. I'm here because I'm done letting people decide what I'm worth without ever asking me. I turned to my parents and pulled out the final document. This one is a formal filing to remove both of you as co-trustees of what remains of Grandma Eleanor's estate, due to attempted unauthorized redistribution and breach of fiduciary duty. Effective immediately, a neutral trustee will oversee the remaining funds. Neither of you will have access or decision-making power over anything connected to her legacy again. My mother's hands were shaking. You would do that to your own parents? Over money? I looked at her. This woman who had spent 31 years calling me a failure while living comfortably off a business partly funded by my grandmother's original real estate ventures. And I felt something settle in my chest that felt a lot like peace. This was never about the money, I said quietly. This is about the fact that you have called me a failure at every single family gathering since I was 11 years old. And tonight, standing in a house my sister can no longer actually afford, celebrating a fund you had no legal right to touch, you called me one again. Except this time, I let you finish the sentence before I corrected you. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Somewhere near the back, I heard my Aunt Susan whisper to my uncle, "Did you know about any of this?" He shook his head slowly. My father finally set his glass down. "We can fix this," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of the confidence it had carried during his toast. "We'll withdraw the petition. We'll talk to the attorney." "Emily, please." "The petition is already dead," I said. "It has been since 9 this morning. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here because I wanted you to hear it from me in person, instead of from a court filing in the mail." Caroline set her glass down on the counter with a shaking hand and walked out onto the back patio alone. I almost followed her. Some old instinct, some leftover need to comfort the sister I'd spent my whole life competing with for scraps of approval, but I stopped myself. She needed to sit with this on her own, the same way I had sat with 31 years of being called the failure on my own. My mother was still holding the financial disclosure papers, staring at the numbers like she was trying to make them rearrange themselves into something she could understand. "Why didn't you tell us?" she finally asked. "Why did you let us believe?" "Because you never asked," I said again, because it was and had always been the entire truth of our relationship. You assumed. You assumed I was struggling, and instead of asking, you built an entire family narrative around it, one where Caroline was the success and I was the cautionary tale. I let you believe it because I stopped needing your validation a long time ago. I built my life without it. And honestly, I built it better because of that. I closed the folder, picked up my bag, and looked at both of my parents one final time. "I hope the house is everything you wanted it to be for her," I said, my voice softening slightly despite everything. "I really do. But from now on, I'll be handling my own finances, my own trust, and my own life, exactly the way I've been doing for the last 9 years, without either of you noticing, and without either of you helping." I didn't hear from my parents for 3 weeks after that dinner. When my mother finally called, her voice was different, smaller somehow than I'd ever heard it. She didn't apologize, not really, not in the way I think I once would have needed her to. But she asked questions she'd never asked before. About my business. About what I'd actually built. About the life I'd been living quietly on the other side of a family who never bothered to look. Caroline reached out a few days after that. She'd had to renegotiate the terms of her mortgage with her fiancé, scaling back to a smaller, more manageable home instead of the one that had never truly been within her reach. "I didn't know," she told me over coffee, her voice quiet in a way I'd never associated with my sister before. "I didn't know they were taking it from your share. I believed them when they said you didn't need it." "I know," I said. And I did know. Because I understood, better than anyone, what it felt like to believe whatever version of the truth this family handed you, simply because it was easier than asking questions. We didn't fix everything that day. Some things I've learned don't get fixed in a single conversation, no matter how honest it is. But it was a start. The first real conversation Caroline and I had ever had that wasn't shaped by our parents standing somewhere in the background, measuring us against each other. The neutral trustee took over management of my grandmother's remaining estate exactly as the court ordered. My parents never touched another cent of it. And for the first time in my life, I stopped waiting for them to see me differently, because I finally understood something I wished I'd understood a decade earlier. Their opinion of me was never actually about me. It was about who they needed me to be, so that Caroline could always be the one who mattered more. 6 months later, I stood in my own office, looking out over a city I had built a life in without a single dollar of my family's money, without a single ounce of their approval, and without ever needing either one to get here. My grandmother Eleanor used to tell me something when I was a little girl, back when my parents were already starting to compare me to Caroline in ways I was too young to fully understand. She'd take my hands in hers and say, "Emily, the quiet ones build empires while everyone else is busy watching the loud ones perform." I hadn't understood it then. I understood it completely now. I still see my family. Holidays are different now, quieter, more careful, but honest in a way they'd never been before. My mother has stopped introducing Caroline first at every gathering. My father has stopped calling my business a hobby. It isn't perfect. I'm not sure it ever will be. But it's real, and after 31 years of being called the failure of the family, real is more than enough. Sometimes people ask me if I regret waiting those 3 weeks, if I regret walking into that dinner smiling, letting them say what they said before I corrected them. I don't. Because sometimes the people who spend your whole life underestimating you need to see, with their own eyes, exactly how wrong they were. Not out of cruelty. Out of truth. I didn't reach into that bag to destroy my family that night. I reached into it to finally be seen. And for the first time in my life, standing in that dining room with my quiet folder and my quiet smile, they finally saw me. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments what you would have done in Emily's position. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life betrayal and revenge stories every week.